You're listening to Somali Nexus, where we unpack the Horn's biggest stories with clarity and heart. Today's episode, Somalia's geopolitical chessboard. New alliances emerge. Why does this moment matter? Because Somalia sits beside a sea route that keeps food moving, fuel flowing, and businesses running. When that corridor is safe, everyone benefits. When it's squeezed, costs rise, and uncertainty spreads. We'll begin with Ethiopia's renewed push for sea access and the wave it created through its understanding with Somaliland, and how Mogadishu answered to defend sovereignty. We'll look at how Djibouti reads the challenge, where Eritrea positions itself, and what Saudi Arabia and the UAE are seeking as they invest and influence along the Red Sea. We'll also explore Turkey's long game in Somalia, steady training for Somali forces, investments that keep vital services running, and a deeper maritime partnership designed to build real capacity at sea. We'll trace how this patient approach aims to turn short-term assistance into lasting security, stronger institutions, and greater bargaining power for Somalia in regional talks. Alongside that, we'll touch on Egypt's visible support and what outside navies want most. Steady, predictable waters. Our aim is simple: map the real options. Can neighbors agree on lawful access that lowers costs and eases tensions? What steps build Somalia's capacity at sea while protecting unity on land? And how can leaders turn geography from a vulnerability into a national advantage? Settle in for a clear human guide to the moves on the board, and the moves that still matter. If this conversation helps you see the road ahead, follow Somali Nexus and subscribe, tap the bell, share this episode with a friend, and send us your questions for a future deep dive. Welcome to the deep dive. You know, sometimes geopolitics feels like this high-stake game of chess. But the thing is, unlike a board game, the moves here have really big consequences. We're talking global trade, stability, even what you pay at the store. Today, we're putting an unexpected, kingmaker, maybe squarely in the spotlight. Somalia. This deep dive, we're going to unravel the complex alliances, the shifts happening right now in the Horn of Africa. And Somalia is right at the strategic heart of it. You might be thinking, okay, Somalia, why should this matter to me? Well, its location, it's critical. It directly impacts global supply chains, shipping costs, international security. Seriously, think about it. Disruptions there, they can ripple out, affect everything from fuel prices to, the cost of your coffee. So, our mission today is simple. Pull out the most important nuggets from all the material we've gathered. Articles, research, our notes. We want to help you quickly get up to speed on why Somalia matters so much right now.
Exactly. And we want to get beyond just the what. What's hitting the headlines. We really need to dig into the why. Why are these events unfolding? Connect those dots to the bigger picture. What could it all mean for the future of this absolutely pivotal region and for global commerce? We're looking for those insights, those aha moments.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Why Somalia? For years, it felt like the conversation was mainly about internal conflict, piracy. Why is it suddenly the focal point of so much global attention?
It really comes down to geography, fundamentally. It sits on one of the world's busiest maritime crossroads. Simple as that, but hugely important.
Its coastline is huge, touches the Gulf of Aden, the Indian Ocean.
And it's right near the el-Mandeb Strait, that narrow passage. That choke point, it funnels a massive amount of shipping towards the Red Sea and the Suez Canal.
That's incredible leverage, just from location.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How that simple geography gives Somalia this enduring strategic weight. It affects manufacturers, food importers, energy markets globally, everyone. Think about those ships. Oil, consumer goods, everything. When traffic flows smoothly, great for everyone. But when it's disrupted, like we've seen recently, insurance costs just skyrocket. Shipping lines have to reroute all the way around Africa. And those costs, they eventually hit us, the consumers, everywhere.
Right? And for so long, as you said, the internal issues, the conflict, al-Shabaab, the piracy problem, they really overshadowed this basic geographic fact. International focus was mostly counterterrorism, humanitarian aid.
Absolutely. That dominated the narrative. But maybe in the last few years, a few things have shifted, bringing Somalia back to the center stage geopolitically. Things like debt relief, for instance, that's improved its financial outlook quite a bit, offering a path towards, greater stability. You also see regional economic integration picking up speed. That creates new incentives for countries to work together. And critically, the recent instability across the Red Sea, that's been a stark reminder for capitals everywhere. Secure passage near Somali waters isn't just a local issue, it's truly global.
The neighborhood, as you put it, is definitely getting crowded.
Crowded is right if it's a chessboard. The Horn of Africa is seeing a real flurry of moves, lots of players vying for access, for influence.
So who are the key players here? What are their main interests?
Okay, well, you've got landlocked Ethiopia, huge country, huge economy, and it's desperate for reliable, affordable sea access. More than one option, ideally. Then there's Djibouti. Its whole economy is largely built on port business, and it hosts multiple foreign military bases. A critical hub, Eritrea has its own strategic coastline, and it's watching its neighbors very carefully, very carefully. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they see the Red Sea as vital for their own security and economic interests. Turkey's been building long-term relationships there for years. And then you have other powers, the US, EU, China with nearby bases, all keeping an eye on maritime security. It's complex.
Okay, this brings us to a really crucial point, a turning point, almost Ethiopia's need for sea access. How did that specific need become such a catalyst for escalating tensions recently?
Right. Ethiopia's economy is just fundamentally reliant on getting goods in and out through the sea. Affordable pathways are essential. And right now, it leans very heavily on Djibouti's ports. Very heavily. That concentration, that reliance on one main corridor creates vulnerabilities, both economic and frankly strategic. So, finding other options, diversifying that access, became a really urgent national priority for Addis Ababa.
And this led to what you call the most disruptive movement, the Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU. This was between Ethiopia and Somaliland, that self-governing region, but crucially, not internationally recognized. What exactly did this deal promise? Why was it so explosive?
So, this Memorandum of Understanding, based on what's been made public, essentially promised Ethiopia a long-term lease on a strip of coastline on the Gulf of Aden for port access. Maybe even potential naval use. That's a big deal. In return, Ethiopia indicated it would consider steps towards recognizing Somaliland's independence, plus offer economic incentives. And this just landed like a shockwave. Because Mogadishu, Somalia's internationally recognized government, saw it as a direct assault on Somalia's territorial integrity. It completely clashed with their federal constitution. Somalia's parliament rejected it immediately. Diplomatic protests flew. International bodies weighed in supporting Somali sovereignty.
That legal point is key, but it does raise a deeper question, doesn't it? How do you square these clear international laws about sovereignty with the sort of messy reality of de facto control on the ground and political ambition, especially when a recognized state's borders are questioned?
That's the fundamental challenge, isn't it? In principle, the law is clear. Somalia is the recognized state. It has authority over all its territory, including Somaliland. Somaliland has control on the ground, but it seeks recognition it doesn't have. And Ethiopia, driven by its practical needs, its logistics, maybe domestic politics too, tried to sort of thread that needle linking port access to a promise about recognition, not actual immediate recognition. But the outcome was predictable, really. Positions hardened. A new alignment started forming, centered squarely on sovereignty.
And that alignment had immediate political effects, like dominoes falling. Egypt, for instance, they already have this major dispute with Ethiopia over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Nile.
A very long-running, very serious dispute about water rights. Yeah.
So, Egypt came out with much clearer support for Somalia, including security cooperation, and Turkey, which is always a significant player there, offered to mediate. But at the same time, they deepened their own bilateral ties with Mogadishu. What else shifted early on?
We also saw Eritrea showing interest in coordinating more closely with Somalia and Egypt. Asmara, Eritrea's capital, is clearly uncomfortable with the idea of any Ethiopian naval presence on the Gulf of Aden. That would shift the regional balance. And interestingly, this whole dispute even kicked off fresh debate about maybe needing a regional framework. Clear rules for how landlocked countries get sea access instead of these ad hoc deals. Something predictable, maybe, based on international norms.
This new alignment, it definitely sends ripples outwards, which brings up Djibouti again. What does this mean for them? Their economy is so tied to Ethiopian cargo. They host all those foreign bases. How do they navigate this?
Well, from Djibouti's viewpoint, any serious competitor to its ports is a direct threat to revenue, to influence. So they responded like you'd expect an incumbent to, trying to defend their position by focusing on service quality, investing in infrastructure, and doing some very careful diplomacy to keep everyone engaged. They need to stay indispensable, essentially.
But it's not just the immediate neighbors you mentioned, the Gulf players, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they share an interest in Red Sea stability, but they often use different methods, right? How does Eritrea fit in here? And what's the Gulf angle?
Eritrea's calculation is quite different from Djibouti's. Its ports, Assab and Massawa, have huge historical and strategic weight for them. And relations between Eritrea and Ethiopia have been cool, shall we say, since the Tigray conflict ended back in 2022. So, Eritrea watches any Ethiopian maritime moves with deep suspicion. An Ethiopian deal with Somaliland, especially if it involves naval facilities, that would really change the game on Eritrea's southern flank. So that helps explain why they started talking more with Somalia and Egypt. It's sort of a loose counterbalancing move. As for the Gulf layer, yes, Saudi Arabia and the UAE both want Red Sea stability, but they operate differently. Riyadh often pushes for multilateral coordination. Abu Dhabi tends to focus on specific investments, bilateral deals, like their involvement in Somaliland's Berbera port. So, Ethiopia tried to link using Berbera to the political issue of recognition. That put the Gulf capitals in a tricky spot. They had to weigh their relationships carefully.
And then overlaying all of this, you have the recent attacks on shipping in the Red Sea itself. Very visible, very disruptive. How does that change the calculus for everyone?
That's a huge factor. Suddenly, the risks are much more concrete. When ships have to divert all the way around Africa, costs soar, insurance premiums jump, schedules get thrown off completely. Those real-world impacts dramatically increase the value of reliable ports and dependable partners. In this kind of tense environment, even a small diplomatic misstep could have really outsized economic consequences. Stability becomes absolutely paramount.
Amidst all this, you mentioned Turkey earlier. Their role in Somalia seems different, somehow quieter, more long-term. They aren't exactly newcomers, are they?
Not at all. Turkey's engagement goes way back. It started very visibly with humanitarian aid during the 2011 famine. But since then, it's grown into really sustained investment, health and education infrastructure, and critically, security cooperation. Turkish companies manage key facilities in Mogadishu like the port and airport, and Turkey runs a major military training base there, Camp Turksum. They've actually trained thousands of soldiers for the Somali National Army. It shows a really deep, patient commitment over many years.
And that partnership got even stronger in 2024, 2025. Right. There was a new framework agreement. What did that focus on?
Yes, a long-term defense and economic cooperation deal, and maritime security was placed right at the center of it. We're talking about things like helping rebuild the Somali Navy, boosting coastal law enforcement capabilities, supporting efforts against illegal fishing, smuggling, and yes, piracy, which still remains a concern. And then energy cooperation also followed, including exploration offshore and onshore. It signals a very comprehensive, very deep engagement.
The benefits seem pretty clear on both sides. Perhaps. What's in it for Somalia? And what does Turkey get out of this deepening relationship?
For Somalia, it's huge. They get a partner who's willing to invest patient capital, transfer actual skills, and stand with them during these kinds of legal and diplomatic disputes. It's a real vote of confidence. For Turkey, the benefits are strategic and economic. A stable foothold on a vital sea lane. Access to potential future commercial opportunities like energy. A reliable partner in a crucial part of the world. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, Turkey's approach, combining that soft power, the development aid, with hard capacity building, it gives them unique leverage in the Horn of Africa. This deep relationship also subtly positions Ankara, Turkey's capital, as a potential go-between a mediator, maybe with Ethiopia. You know, mediation only works if both sides believe the mediator has skin in the game. Something to lose, something to offer. Turkey fits that bill. They have real equity in Somalia succeeding, but they also maintain established diplomatic chants with Addis Ababa. That gives them a unique ability to maybe convene talks, nudge things along, propose legal frameworks that could actually de-escalate the situation.
Okay, so if this region really is this high-stake chessboard, let's pull back for a second. Let's look at the core drivers for each main player. What are Somalia's absolute non-negotiables here? What's Ethiopia's deepest need? How do these shape their alliances?
Understanding those first principles is definitely key to figuring out what might happen next. For Somalia, number one is sovereignty. And tied to that, insisting that only the federal government in Mogadishu can make international deals, especially about territory or sea access. They're focused on gradually building up their own maritime capacity, Coast Guard, Navy, and they're looking for partners who back those goals. So the Arab League, Turkey, Egypt fit that description. They also want deeper regional economic integration.
Okay, and Ethiopia?
Ethiopia's fundamental need is cheaper, reliable, diversified sea access, more than just Djibouti. The backlash from that Somaliland MOU showed them the high political cost of trying to link access to recognition. So, a more sustainable path for Ethiopia probably involves negotiating commercial access directly with Somalia's federal government, plus improving the Djibouti corridor, looking for other low-risk options.
What about Djibouti? Their whole model relies on being that main hub.
Exactly. So, Djibouti wants to stay indispensable. That means top-notch port services, competitive prices, and really careful, balanced diplomacy, with everyone hosting those foreign military bases. That's both revenue and a kind of strategic insurance policy for them. Any crisis disrupting trade hits Djibouti right where it hurts.
And Eritrea? Their position seems more about strategic balance.
Eritrea definitely wants to keep its options open, avoid being sort of boxed in by Ethiopia's moves, especially towards the sea. So, coordinating more closely with Somalia and Egypt, that serves as both a signal to Ethiopia and a potential counterweight if needed. It's about maintaining regional balance.
From their perspective then, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE share that broad goal: a stable Red Sea, secure energy routes, influence on both sides of the water. But as we said, different tools. Riyadh often pushes multilateral frameworks. Abu Dhabi frequently uses targeted investments. Bilateral partnerships like in Berbera, they both have to carefully weigh their ties to Ethiopia, Somalia, Somaliland. It's delicate.
Turkey, we discussed their deep engagement.
Turkey is looking for that durable anchor in Africa, blending development aid, defense cooperation, and future energy deals. Their credibility in Mogadishu is key to their potential role as a mediator. Their bilateral work and mediation efforts kind of complement each other.
And finally, the outside powers, US, EU, China.
Others, for the most part, extra-regional powers. The US, EU, China, Japan, France, Italy, their interests converge on a pretty simple keep the sea lane secure and work with predictable partners. Their military presence in nearby bases, like in Djibouti, reflects a preference for de-escalation, for pragmatic cooperation. They largely try to avoid getting dragged into internal fights about recognition.
So how does all this, these alliances, these national interests, actually translate into policy on the ground? It feels like security and economics, diplomacy, are just completely tangled up.
They absolutely are. You can't separate them. Think about security. For maybe 2 decades, Somalia's main security focus was understandably fighting al-Shabaab. That's still vital. But now, the maritime front is equally critical. Piracy, smuggling, the broader Red Sea instability. This just highlights how urgently Somalia needs a capable navy and coast guard, and one that's transparently funded and governed.
And the economic side? Those corridors you mentioned?
Yeah, the economic corridors are all about leverage. The Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway is the main artery now for Ethiopian trade. The Berbera corridor through Somaliland aims to be a second major route. And then there's the LAPSSET corridor idea, involving Kenya's Lamu Port South Sudan-Ethiopia transport, another massive infrastructure project aiming for the Indian Ocean. Somalia's strongest negotiating position here comes from offering lawful, federally approved port and transit agreements, deals that share revenue fairly within Somalia.
In diplomacy, what are Somalia's best tools there?
Law and alignment, sticking to international law, keeping negotiations clearly at the federal level, inviting regional observers, actively participating in bodies like IGAD or the East African Community that build support for Somali stability. And being transparent about major deals. Publishing summaries helps build trust both domestically and with international partners.
Okay, but inevitably, there are risks. Potential tripwires. What are the biggest dangers we should be watching for in this really complex?
Picture this. I'd say there are three main clusters of risk. First is escalation by miscalculation. A symbolic act, maybe a groundbreaking for a new port facility, or just some rash political speech could trigger a much bigger reaction than intended. The remedy there is disciplined messaging, using quiet diplomatic channels, and having really clear legal agreements that leave no room for doubt.
What's the second risk?
Second is the danger of security vacuums if these political disputes spill over and affect, say, the African Union mission in Somalia, ATMIS. If countries pull out troops suddenly or stop cooperating, that could create gaps. Gaps that armed groups like al-Shabaab are ready and waiting to exploit. So careful planning for any transitions in security responsibility is absolutely critical. We can't afford to lose hard-won gains.
And a third.
Third is economic coercion. Countries in the region pressuring each other, using things like customs delays, roadblocks, hiking up port fees punitively. That kind of tit for tat just ends up hurting consumers on all sides. Prices go up, goods get delayed. Really? Competition based on service, quality, efficiency, transparent pricing. That's the much wiser path than using economic barriers as weapons.
And layered on top of those risks, you have these structural constraints, right? International law, norms about recognition, the sheer cost and difficulty of building major infrastructure, and always domestic politics limiting what leaders can actually agree to.
Exactly. Which brings us back to that crucial question. How do these deals, even if signed, actually translate into tangible benefits for ordinary citizens? Because if they don't improve daily life, they probably won't stick long term.
That really is the ultimate test, isn't it?
It is.
So, looking ahead, let's map out some possible futures here. Based on everything we've discussed, what are the plausible ways this could evolve? Let's start with maybe the best realistic outcome. Manage rivalry with rules. What would that look like?
Right. In this scenario, Somalia and Ethiopia managed to negotiate a formal commercial access agreement at the federal level, carefully structured to be purely about logistics and economics, sidestepping the whole recognition issue. Maybe you even see some kind of regional framework emerge, setting clear rules for how landlocked states use ports without threatening anyone's sovereignty. Djibouti would likely remain the main hub, but it would face healthy competition from other corridors. Perhaps Berbera, operating under a federal Somali agreement. Naval cooperation in the region would continue, but with better coordination, better deconfliction measures at sea, early signs. We'd look for softened public rhetoric, maybe leaks about draft legal texts focused only on commercial terms, public-private investment flowing into multiple corridors, clearly separated from political strings.
Okay, that's the optimistic or maybe pragmatic view. What about the second future? Fragmented competition without war, sort of drift case. What does that involve?
This is where things just kind of muddle along that Somaliland MOU. It might just sit there in limbo, neither fully implemented nor fully abandoned. Ethiopia might incrementally try to use alternative logistics routes where it can, perhaps through Berbera commercially, but without pushing the legal boundaries too hard. Somalia would likely double down on its security partnerships with Turkey, maybe Egypt too. Eritrea would coordinate selectively, keeping its options open. Djibouti would focus on maximizing its service quality to retain business. It'd still see naval patrols, maybe occasional escorts for shipping in the Red Sea, but no major breakthroughs. Early signs here. Steady but maybe quiet construction on different corridors. Regular but not necessarily dramatic announcements of military assistance or training. But crucially, an absence of any real diplomatic breakthrough. It's an uneasy status quo, basically.
And then the one we hope to avoid, the worst-case scenario, spiral and spillover. What are the warning signs for that dangerous path?
This is where a relatively small incident, maybe a clash at sea, a border dispute flaring up, escalates badly. You could see sanctions being imposed, diplomats expelled, maybe even troop mobilizations. Armed groups would absolutely exploit that chaos and distraction. Insurance costs for shipping could spread well beyond just the immediate Red Sea area. External mediators would find it incredibly difficult to get any traction. The warning signs, publicly declared red lines tied to specific events, like starting construction on a contested facility, sudden withdrawals from regional security missions, tit for tat, restrictions on cargo movements, or even overflight rights. But it's important to stress this worst-case path isn't inevitable. It's not rational for anyone involved. Avoiding it takes restraint, patience, and honestly getting things down and writing real legal text that's strong enough to withstand future pressures.
Okay, so with those potential futures sketched out, let's bring it back to Somalia. What can Somalia realistically do now to protect its autonomy, to steer towards that better outcome, and really shape its own destiny in this incredibly complex neighborhood?
There are several key things based on the analysis we've seen. First, institutionalize that maritime capacity. Turn the promises of help into a concrete, transparent plan for building up the Navy and Coast Guard. As we said, partners can give ships in training. Only Somalia can provide the long-term legitimacy and continuity. Second, keep those access negotiations strictly at the federal level and grounded in law. Anchor any agreements in international maritime law. Third, really leverage membership in regional economic blocs. Harmonize customs rule standards. Make Somalia an indispensable part of regional value chains that builds interdependence. Fourth, carefully balance external partnerships. Deepen ties with key allies like Turkey and Arab partners, yes, but maintain practical coordination with the EU, the US, others involved in maritime security. Don't become overly reliant on any single partner. And finally, crucially, invest in federal cohesion within Somalia. Things like fair revenue sharing from ports or resources. Clear roles for federal and state security forces. Internal unity is fundamental to external strengths.
Those are concrete steps for Somalia. What about the other players on this chessboard? What are the targeted recommendations for them? What can Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea, the Gulf states, Turkey, and others do to lower the temperature and foster stability?
Okay, for Ethiopia, the main advice is to pivot away from the politics of recognition and towards practical friction reducing commerce. Seek those bankable time-bound access agreements directly with Mogadishu. For Djibouti, compete on service quality and efficiency, not by trying to block competitors. Signal neutrality in these disputes. For Eritrea, use the new diplomatic channels that have opened up to push for rules-based outcomes, while obviously safeguarding its own interests and autonomy. The Gulf states align their port investments with multilateral standards and maybe regional plans. Critically keep commercial deals separate from the thorny issue of recognition. For Turkey, maintain a clear distinction between its role as a potential mediator and its own bilateral projects. Transparency, especially around energy deals, is key. And for those extra-regional powers, the US, EU, etc., the focus should be on preserving those deconfliction channels at sea, supporting Somali maritime law enforcement capacity generally, and firmly avoiding taking sides in Somalia's internal constitutional matters.
As we start to wrap up this deep dive, it feels incredibly clear that Somalia is, well, it's not a geopolitical footnote anymore, not by a long shot. It's genuinely a central player shaping how the entire Horn of Africa connects with the rest of the world. And these recent controversies, difficult as they've been, they seem to have forced a kind of clarity, which maybe paradoxically creates an opening for a more durable settlement.
I think that's right. A stable equilibrium is possible. You can imagine it.
Yeah, okay.
Ethiopia gets its diversified sea access through federal Somali agreements. Somalia builds real maritime capacity with international help. Djibouti competes fairly based on service. Turkey plays a constructive mediation role. The Gulf capitals focus on keeping the Red Sea open and stable. Extra-regional powers protect international shipping while supporting local authorities to take more responsibility. That's achievable, of course, that drift scenario, the uneasy, fragmented peace. That's also quite plausible. But the key takeaway is that the worst-case spiral isn't inevitable. It doesn't serve anyone's rational interests.
So, in the end, it seems Somalia's future autonomy really hinges on choices that are fundamentally within its own control. Keeping foreign policy firmly in federal hands, making sure alliances match national goals, not just personalities, and consistently investing in the actual capabilities, the Coast Guard, the institutions that make sovereignty real on the ground and at sea. Geography gave Somalia this incredible leverage, but it's governance, good governance, that could turn that leverage into a lasting advantage. And maybe that holds a lesson for other nations navigating similar pressure. What does that idea mean elsewhere? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive.